Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are heading to one of the most stunning archipelagos on Earth, the Philippines. We're talking over 7,000 islands, holding a staggering level of biodiversity and packed with species you will literally find nowhere else on the planet. But we're not just here to daydream about pristine beaches and crystal clear water today. We're going to discover exactly how to balance those breathtaking travel experiences with sustainable, responsible practices. Okay, let's dive right into this.
It's the ultimate question for the modern traveler, isn't it? I mean, when we think of the Philippines, we picture untouched white sand, vibrant coral reefs, and this incredible wildlife. But the second we set foot in these delicate ecosystems, we leave a footprint. So, the absolute crucial point we're exploring today is how we can actually enjoy the world's beauty without kind of loving it to death. How do we make choices that protect rather than degrade these spectacular destinations? Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the cost of paradise. Then, ethical encounters in Bohol. Third, Palawan's sustainable master plan. Fourth, we'll compare Coron versus El Nido. And finally, we'll wrap up with the unspoiled beauty of Batanes.
All right, part one, the cost of paradise and the ecotourism dilemma.
You know, the hidden toll that unregulated tourism takes on these ecosystems reveals this classic, almost tragic dilemma. The very things that attract us to a place are usually the most threatened by our presence there. Take the Philippine tarsier. This is one of the most unusual and fragile animals you will ever encounter. They are tiny, they are completely nocturnal, and they are incredibly shy. Their vulnerability comes from being highly sensitive to noise, artificial light, and human contact. Honestly, even small amounts of stress can physically harm them. In fact, their life expectancy drops dramatically the minute they're taken out of their undisturbed natural habitat. And yet, well-intentioned tourists flock to see them by the thousands every single year.
Moving on to part two, ethical encounters in Bohol and choosing the right path.
700. That is it. That's the estimated number of Philippine tarsiers remaining in Bohol today. It's wild because back in the 1960s, they were incredibly common across the southern part of the island. But thanks to habitat destruction, pollution, and the illegal pet trade, their numbers have just absolutely plummeted. When a population drops this low, every single individual matters. It means our margin for error in how we interact with them is basically zero.
So if you find yourself in Bohol, you face a stark choice between two main viewing areas. First, you got the Philippine Tarsier Foundation Sanctuary in Corella. It's a not-for-profit supported by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. They enforce super strict rules, they prioritize education, and they only let tiny guided groups into the habitat. On the flip side, there's the Bohol Tarsier Conservation Area in Pilar. Now, despite having the word conservation right in the name, it's heavily trafficked, it's self-guided, it's noisy, and animals are often perched conspicuously close to raised boardwalks. Plus, there's a real lack of transparency on where visitor fees actually go. For us, conscious travelers, deciding where to spend our money is a really impactful decision.
Now, if you do visit an ethical sanctuary, these viewing rules aren't just polite suggestions. They are literal lifelines for the animals. You absolutely have to travel in very small groups. There is strictly no flash photography. Remember, their huge eyes are adapted for pitch darkness, so a flash is agonizing. You've got to stay whisper quiet and keep those phones on silent. Keep your physical distance. If you want a close-up, rely on a zoom lens. And actually scratch the selfie idea entirely. Never try to pose for a selfie with a tarsier. If one is visible in your selfie, you are standing entirely too close to a highly stressed animal.
Okay, part three, Palawan's sustainable master plan and structural solutions.
Individual choices like picking the right sanctuary are a great start, but they aren't enough on their own. We need systemic, structural frameworks. Enter the ECAN zoning framework. That's the Environmentally Critical Area Network. This is a brilliant strategic approach by the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development to handle massive tourism impacts. Basically, they divide the environment into distinct zones. Think of it like a bullseye. The preservation area is the core zone. This is where absolute utmost efforts go into protecting target environments like virgin forests and intact coral reefs. Human activity here is heavily restricted. And then, surrounding that core, you have the conservation area. Check out how these conservation areas actually function in practice, especially for the ocean. You have the strict preservation area right at the shoreline and the reef flat. But here's the thing. Marine ecosystems are incredibly fluid. Currents carry pollution and disruption way beyond where they start, so a narrow little buffer on land just isn't going to cut it. The conservation zone acts as this massive physical buffer, extending a full 7 kilometers out from the shoreline into the open ocean. This physically insulates that delicate preservation area from the indirect impacts of boating, development, and just general human activity. This right here is how you structurally plan for sustainable long-term tourism.
Let's move to part 4. Coron versus El Nido, the traveler's choice.
Let's apply our sustainability lens to two of Palawan's most famous destinations, which sit about 100 kilometers apart by sea. El Nido is the heavyweight champion of popularity right now. It's bustling, highly developed, and packed with restaurants, nightlife, and accessible mainland beaches. Plus, it's world famous for those jaw-dropping turquoise lagoons. Coron, on the other hand, is distinctly quieter and way less developed. Accommodation is generally more budget-friendly, and the dining scene is pretty limited. But what Coron offers is world-class snorkeling, exotic coral reefs, and sunken shipwrecks that are just unparalleled. And because its best beaches are only reachable by boat, it naturally limits the daily foot traffic.
So what it all comes down to is the trade-off. As a conscious traveler, you have to weigh your desire for extensive amenities against the sheer impact of large crowds. Tourist demand in El Nido has in many ways drastically outpaced its infrastructure. Choosing Coron offers a chance to spread that economic benefit out a bit more. It lets you enjoy a quieter, more nature-focused trip with slightly less strain on local resources. Now, neither destination is wrong to visit, for sure, but both require you to travel mindfully.
Finally, part 5, the unspoiled beauty of Batanes, the pristine ideal. But hey, what if you want to go completely off the beaten path? Well, that brings us to Batanes, the absolute smallest and northernmost province in the Philippines. To put it into perspective, it's actually geographically closer to Taiwan than it is to the Philippine capital of Manila. It's constantly described as the ultimate reward for low-impact, slow-paced travel. Because it is so remote, and because flights are limited and pretty rarely discounted, the logistics naturally gate the number of tourists who can even get there. This isolation has profoundly preserved a way of life that is incredibly tranquil, deeply respectful of nature, and fiercely protective of its local culture. When you arrive, the experiences are just breathtaking. You've got these sweeping, vibrant green landscapes like Marlborough Hills and the Vayang Rolling Hills. You have picturesque, historic lighthouses overlooking the vast ocean. And culturally, you have the traditional Ivatan stone houses. These are incredible structures, built with thick limestone walls and thatched kagan roofs, engineered centuries ago specifically to withstand the fierce typhoons that sweep through the region. It's a perfect, enduring example of humans adapting to their environment rather than trying to force the environment to adapt to them.
And what's truly beautiful about Batanes is that the local infrastructure practically guides you to travel responsibly. You fly into the municipality of Basco. Then, instead of piling into massive diesel-heavy tour buses, you hire local tricycles or rent bicycles to get around, which keeps your carbon footprint incredibly low. Instead of mega resorts, you stay in authentic Ivatan homestays, ensuring your money goes straight to local families. And perhaps the absolute best anecdote of the island's culture is the Honesty Coffee Shop. It's a completely unmanned store. You literally just take what you need, log it in a book, and leave your cash in a box. It's a stunning reflection of the deep trust and incredibly low crime rate within the community. A quick heads up before you pack your bags, keep these practical tips in mind. Batanes is famously known as the home of the winds. The best time to visit is during the dry summer season, from March to May. If you plan a trip from July to November, you run a really high risk of encountering typhoons and canceled flights. Always, always pack a light jacket and a raincoat, because the weather can turn on a dime, even on a perfectly sunny day. And most importantly, bring cash. There are only a couple of ATMs on the main island, and credit cards are basically unheard of there. We've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From the delicate tarsiers of Bohol to the master-planned marine buffer zones of Palawan and the isolated windswept beauty of Batanes. The one unifying thread through all of this is that our presence matters. The choices we make, whether it's seeking out strict ethical sanctuaries, respecting local zoning laws, or just embracing slow travel in remote places, those choices dictate whether these paradises even survive for the next generation. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Armed with this new perspective, where will your sustainable journey take you next? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.